This is a new group for, not actually new, but a less familiar group to me. And there we go. And in addition, you should know this about me. I was on the problem solving and technology-rich environments group. We formed the framework, and the construct, we formed the items, and we did the scaling. It was an international group, a wonderful experience, and I think we're ready to go, huh? Okay. So here's some thoughts about these papers. These are the papers, and I just want to say a couple of things at the very beginning. First of all, they're outstanding papers, really important work. And I want to encourage, the second thing, I want to encourage all of the authors before these go to publication, I'm assuming they're going to go to publication, that you have an opportunity here to really affect public policy with your data. So really tighten it down to the issues you want to communicate, you think are most powerful in your data, and then make public policy recommendations at the end, because the data is very compelling in a whole bunch of different dimensions. So I hope you do that. I am all about trying to get the world to change. And it's not easy, but one of the things you have to do is you have to distill it down to a very clear message. And I encourage you to do that. Well, the change to the workplace is pretty obvious to most of us. Here's an Australian cab going to the airport. I was speaking at the Australian Literacy Educators Conference in Sydney. And there were 17 different technologies for literacy that this cab driver was doing. I was just, I couldn't believe it. So I asked him to pull over, keep the thing running, and I interviewed him. I took field notes for half an hour about his literate practices with each one of these. It's profound. The changes we're going through are absolutely profound. This is also the BMW plant in Greenville, South Carolina. This area is surrounded by the actual car manufacturing. The cars are coming down the assembly line, and robots are riveting things together and putting pieces together, putting this car together. And a couple of people are walking around with the walkie-talkie back to these folks, telling them how things are going. In the meantime, they're problem solving in this technology-rich environment of the control room. It's absolutely amazing the way automobile manufacturing has changed. If you have not been in an automobile plant that is high-tech, you must go, because it really redefines the nature of workforce preparation. It is just so profound. Here are a few results that we have. These generally providing the context, not from these papers, but larger results. U.S. adults scored below the international in all three domains: numeracy, literacy, and problem solving. The percentage of U.S. adults who scored at the lowest levels was among the largest in PIAAC. The gaps in performance associated with SES are larger in the United States than any other participating country. Skill level is also correlated with attitudes and behaviors that support thriving democratic institutions. Interesting pattern. So that's the context. Now that's the broader context. And the thing, you probably already know this, but it is impressive to me and scary to me. These results are important to multinational corporations. They can go anywhere they want as long as there's a workforce that's prepared. And you've got to believe that they're looking at these results. You just have to believe that. We did not come up real well. Steve, a new friend, one of my former doctoral students, is out working with him. And I loved your work. Thank you so much for sharing it. I just want to put some of the high points here. Steve very creatively used the SAS to define a digital inclusion pathway leading from access to taste to readiness to digital literacy. This is going to be a very important construct for all of us because it gives us a developmental way to look at the issues rather than just looking at means for different populations. Digital literacy and ICT use is embedded in the earnings of prime age workers, and I know you are very cautious about causality, but it's tightly embedded in the earnings of prime age workers. That's why this novel assessment, the first time we've had an assessment like this, problem-solving technology-rich environments, is so critically important because it is so closely associated with earnings. And also, digital literacy and ICT use in adults is also embedded measures of social trust, all of these positive attributes that make for a stronger democratic society. So it looks like it's a pretty powerful measure of important factors. On the second paper, in terms of transitions to literacy, this was a study of learners versus non-learners analysis, and a couple of high points that caught my attention. The ratio of post-secondary learners to non-learners, 3.4 to 1, is more than twice the high school level. I mean, that's pretty dramatic. And about 3 times that of the less than high school level. They also talked about a number of important barriers and motivators in their analysis. This is going to be very helpful to all of us in understanding better the blocks and the incentives for folks. And then they also looked at the predictors of adult participation in formal and informal learning. Very important work. And the other thing that caught my attention is this is they presented one of several data points that I heard today that really contribute to the income inequality issues that we face in our nation, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. It's hugely important to our nation. We do work in that area in the K-12 level. I'll mention it just briefly at the end, and it's another source of that issue. Then the third paper, Adult Readiness to Learn as a Predictor of Literacy Skills, another outstanding paper. And I know you sort of bobbed and weaved around the issue of readiness, but you know, it's not a bad construct. It's not a bad construct. We might think of a different label for it here in the U.S., but it's not a bad construct because, as Stephen pointed out, we want to look at these issues in a developmental progression. So it'll be very helpful to us. It's especially important, you noted, at the lower educational levels, and that's why it's really important, it seems to me. And it's more meaningful to the extent to which adults use information processing skills, which is also of importance in this area. And it looks like it's more related to skill use at home than at work. And Stephen, you found this as well. You, in your pathway, you said that it seemed to come in at home initially. And I may be wrong about that, but I think there might have been a gender pattern in there too. And then readiness to learn and other predictor variables only account for 25% of the variance in skill use. So we have to keep that in mind as well. So why are all of these data important? Well, we saw some images at the beginning. The nature of work has fundamentally changed. This is a General Motors model of economic management, top-down, command and control. And you waste the intellectual capital of all of these levels over here. The bottom 2/3 of the levels, people contribute very little intellectual capital to solving the problem. The orders come from up above. The line worker at the bottom just implements them, contributes little to the process, and we saw what happened to General Motors. And so companies and organizations have been changing. Now, my dream of all dreams is that 2 other units would change this way as well and flatten out the decision-making, empowering teams to make important decisions close to their area. One would be the educational system. We tend to be still command and control. And 2 would be the government. Darn it. We could be much better, much more efficient if somehow we figured out a way to empower teams and work a little more effectively. Anyway, the issue here is that you get greater intellectual capital use, and companies have figured this out. They're much more productive when they do this. They can outcompete a company that's very hierarchically structured. And in a very aggressive business world, the companies that restructure and take advantage of the intellectual capital are the ones that are more productive and tend to win at the end of the game. What do they do within these teams? Well, increasingly they're using online information resources to problem solve. And that's why problem solving in technology-rich environments, a horrible name, I hope they come up with something better than that, We refer to it as simply online reading or online research and comprehension, and problem solving is what it is. Because when we use the internet with information, we're reading. We're reading to solve a problem. It could be a small one, what's the best flight home, or it could be a long one or a large one. What is my role in this world in order to make more possible a world that is a better place? That's what we use the internet for. The information on the internet. Anyway, we use texting and other things for communication, but the information is that. And that's what these teams do. They often use online information to solve a problem. They locate, they evaluate, they synthesize, and they solve the problem, and then they communicate the solution to everyone else throughout the organization. So the internet and other technologies are used extensively in the workplace today to conduct research, solve problems, and learn. Now, let me just give you a quick look what the K-12 response to a number of these issues that we're facing around the world. Common Core State Standards, like it, hate it, whatever it is, it's a pretty profound change. And there are three elements to these changes that that are driven by the same data that you're seeing here today. One, there's an increase on informational text reading in the K-12 schools. We are shifting away from narratives to informational text. Why? Because informational texts are what we use to solve problems with in online context. Two, higher level thinking is emphasized. Rather than literal understanding, we're looking at evaluative understanding, at higher forms of comprehension. And finally, new digital literacies are integrated for the first time into the Common Core State Standards. Not as well as I'd like, not in the right places, but it's the first time we've ever seen this in any set of standards here in the United States. I don't know if you know this or not, 3 billion people use the internet in the world. The growth rate is exponential. It increases at a faster rate every single year. The prediction is easily within 10 years, everyone or nearly everyone will have access to the internet. Some will have smartphones. Many will have smartphones, the vast majority. But increasingly, the internet is an important part of our lives. And what that means is if you're a second grader this year, by the time you graduate from high school, everyone will have access. The workplace will be even more profoundly changed. So an important theme in the studies that were presented today, first of all, seems to me that there's a substantial gap that may be growing between those at the top and the bottom in the U.S. economy. And that growing income inequality is a hugely important issue for all of us. There's related work to this you should know about. Sean Reardon out at Stanford did a really provocative series of studies with national assessment data in reading, math, and science over since 1940. And he found that the 90-10 income achievement gap for school-aged children using national test scores in reading, it's growing faster than the black-white achievement gap. It's related to the work that's been presented here today, and it should be cause for concern for all of us. There's also a separate and independent achievement gap that we found in a recent study appeared in RRQ, Reading Research Quarterly. It'll formally appear in January. The pre-release has already gone out, and the New York Times and other publications have picked up on it. But it was it found a separate and independent achievement gap based on income inequality for online reading. That is, when we controlled for pretest differences in offline reading, offline reading, offline writing, and prior knowledge. We controlled for those variables between a very wealthy and a somewhat poor, not very poor, a somewhat poor school district, students at one grade level, all of the students at the 7th grade level. We controlled for those, and there was a separate and independent achievement gap for students' ability to read online. So our notion of the achievement gap in reading is actually much greater than what we think it is, because we only measure it with offline reading performance. And as we move from page to screen, reading is going to increasingly take place online. And so it was not just a minimal, it was an effect size, a Hedges G size, which is a measure of how big an effect is, from 0.94 to 1.4, which is large. It's categorized as a large effect size. And it was across the board with both assessments that we used, with every skill item that we measured, and with every category of skills that we measured. Also, the Congressional Budget Office in 2007 came out with a very thorough report showing how income inequality is increasing in the United States. All of these are related to the data that we're seeing here. It seems to me that income inequality is hugely important in the work that we talk with one another about here today and tomorrow. And finally, there's this last data point, a recent study that economic mobility going up the income ladder is now less in the United States than it is in Europe and other developed nations. Thank you. Now, I want to talk about some methodological issues with PIAC and problem solving. There are some methodological issues in all of this. This may not be our focus here today, but you need to be cautious about these results. First of all, the background variables. I looked through PIAC, and I couldn't find where they went out and at least did a validation study checking for the self-report data validity. That is, you can go out and if somebody reports that they're a high school graduate, you can go out and check that and test it. And I may be wrong, but I'm not sure on all of this self-report data. I don't know if they validated that or not. And self-report data is somewhat problematic, as I'll mention. They also have separated scenario-based tasks. I'll talk about that rather than full performance-based tasks, and I'll talk about the limitations of that. And then the evaluation of search engine use was not included. It was not included. They did not have adults try and locate information on the internet. So here's the self-report data issue. It's widely used, of course, in surveys, research. But some people, measurement people especially, consider it somewhat unreliable due to social desirability response bias. That is, participants sometimes say what they think you want to hear or what is socially more valued. So we have to be careful about that. And as I said, typically external validations measures are used. And it may have been done, but I just couldn't find it. I looked and looked and I couldn't find it. Here's the scenario-based tasks in problem solving. The scenario-based tasks are better than just flat multiple choice, but they're still multiple choice. Don't get them wrong, they're still multiple choice. And so here's an issue where they have to figure out which of these tabs up at the top provides them with the best information. Which of those websites provides them with the best information, but they still have to pick over on the left A, B, C, or D. They're given a scenario on the left and then an image of a web page or other technology tool, and then you have to manipulate it some way. But the manipulation is very limited and it's quite restricted. So there are three different ways of measuring digital literacies, from least restricted to most restricted: a simulation, a full simulation of what it's like, a scenario-based, which problem solving used, and then flat multiple choice. We looked at this in a large federal research grant, the ORCA project, where we developed simulation assessments for 7th graders of online research and comprehension. And we found actually the simulations were more reliable by about 10%. Thank you. We also found that we had a better picture of component difficulty. That is, the 4 categories of skills we evaluated. The blue line is multiple choice. It's pretty flat. You get 25% right by just guessing, and so that presents a flatter pattern of scores. You get less discrimination, and as a result, you get less valuable information on how students actually perform. The red line is the simulation, and you get a much clearer picture of how students perform, what the weak areas, what the strong areas are. So our initial thoughts on comparing more restricted and least restricted simulations context is simulations demonstrated richer dimensionality, they demonstrated higher levels of reliability, and they demonstrated greater variability of component scores. So really what I'm arguing here is that eventually we need to move to simulations in problem solving with online, and we also need to include locating information. Locating information is a bottleneck skill. If you can't locate information, you can't solve your problem. You can't read. You can't get access to the information you need. So simulations such as of complex online learning tasks are possible, and they're likely to generate richer and more useful psychometric data. And the current constructs of literacy and problem-solving technology-rich environments are inevitably going to be merged. I have no doubt about that. Literacy will be the literacy of online reading, perhaps in 10 years from now. But in the meantime, we have two parallel tracks going with offline reading and online reading. And eventually, my best guess is that we'll have a literacy construct, and it'll include a wide variety of reading contexts. Quick implications. Clearly, workforce preparation needs to be an important priority, and it needs to include digital literacies for problem solving. Equally as clear, we need to attack the growing income achievement gap in the United States, and workforce preparation is one part of the issue. The digital inclusion pathway is important initial guidance, and it appears important to focus on adult education practices that enhance the readiness to learn of low education learners. And workplace learning is limited by many non-learners and learners at low education levels. So thank you.